What was the dumbest assignment you were given in school? Story 1. In my 8th grade English class, we had a South African teacher who wanted to teach art instead. We read maybe 2 books over the entire year, but we made about 15 paintings related to the book we read on our own. Right before winter break, she told us that we would each be writing a 50-page fiction book over the next month and a half, including the break. We had to make a proposal and a summary of our story and present it to the class for a grade. Barely anyone worked on their book over the break, which pissed the teacher off. I started writing my book 10 days before it was due, and at one point I wrote 20 pages in a day, but usually just did 4 to 6 pages per day. Naturally, my book was flailing nonsense, mostly lifted up from Magic the Gathering lore. And it kinda just ended at a certain point, but I spent a shitload of time working on it, so whatever. The assignment was brutal for an 8th grader, especially coupled with other homework, so I was just happy with writing the full 50 pages. When we turned our books in, one of my friends told me that he only wrote 20 pages of actual content and the rest were random words strung together. And another friend only wrote 25 pages. I was pretty proud of myself for legitimately trying. Then our teacher had us sell our books to her by wearing dress clothes and pitching our stories to her. We received 3 grades for that, and she didn't even have to grade us on the actual books or even read them. My friend who the assignment made the same grades as me. I could have given her 50 pages of Greeking and gotten the same grade. It was the most fruitless thing I've ever done. And she didn't even give us our books back, no matter how many times our parents asked. It was without a doubt the worst assignment I've ever done, and nothing else has come close. Story 2. The teacher from my AP Government class used to make us grade the tests and papers from his other classes because we were smart enough to learn the material on our own. We never really complained about it because grading tests is more fun than doing actual work. But in the end, it kinda sucked because most of us did really badly in the AP exams. There are 3 branches of government, and by the time the AP exams rolled around, we had only gone over 2 in class. Story 3. In high school, we had to write a letter about a rule or policy that we didn't like and address it to someone in a high position at a company or in the government or whatever. Everyone thought it was just an exercise, so most of us just wrote a letter to the principal about a stupid rule that we didn't like. Turns out the teacher sent every letter without telling us. One at a time, we were called into the principal's office, and about 3/4 of the class got detentions for it. That's such bullshit. Story 4. We once had a crossword in chemistry. Crosswords are stupid assignments anyway, but this one took the cake. Instead of clues to figure out and write in the blanks, the clues were the words. The assignment was literally to copy the words into the blanks. The teacher used some old Windows 95 program to make them. The program could make either crosswords or word searches. I'm pretty sure she meant to make a word search and made a crossword by accident, but you'd think she would have realized it at some point. Story 5. I had an English teacher in high school. It was his first year teaching there, and he was not well liked for some of his policies regarding the class. He knew this, and towards the end of the year, maybe 3/4 in, gave us a choice of 2 assignments. A very long essay about the characters in some book we were reading, or a 1-page letter addressing why we don't like him and what he could do to change. Turns out, only myself and 3 other kids in the class did a letter. How do I know it was only 3 other kids? Because he reported us all to the principal, and we were called in one day to get a lecture about how disrespectful we had been to the teacher, and we all got in-school suspensions. Story 6. My biology teacher during my senior year wanted us to collect all these plant samples in winter on the west coast of Canada. Yeah, about 75% of the plants she assigned us weren't blooming at all at this time of year. To be fair, she was from South Africa, but honestly, maybe just research the area before assigning a project like that. It's impossible to find dandelions and maple leaves when it's freaking January. Story 7. In community college, our sociology professor wanted us to go into Little Tokyo in downtown LA and ask World War II related questions to anyone who looked Japanese. I decided to drop that class and get a W instead. Story 8. I went to college in Illinois. The very first assignment in English 101-145 was write an essay about what it's like to be in a cornfield to someone who's never been in one. I had to raise my hand and be like, I'm from New Jersey. Everyone was flabbergasted that there could be a person who had never been in a cornfield. Story 9. Not me, but my brother. I know, but it's a story that needs to be shared. He is in a 200-level film course, winter term, and in late January, the professor gives out a list of movies that will be valid subjects for the midterm, and that the students should choose a movie they do not know well, and if there are none on the list they know, they have nearly a month to watch some off the list and then rewatch the one they'd like to do for the project. The teacher mentions that the project can be done in multiple formats to fit the creative needs of all students, so that they can best express what they feel is most important in the film without being confined to the middle school essay format. My brother notices that The Iron Giant, one of the greatest movies of all time, I'm sure we can all agree, is on the list, and watches the movie right away when he gets home and asks if I want to do the project with him in podcast form, which had been okayed by the professor. Now, the rubric for the assignment hadn't been sent out yet, but wanting to do well in the course and wanting to do one of his favorite films justice, my brother watches the film about 3 times and takes all sorts of notes and reads a lot of articles about it, while I do similar, though I only watched it once and read a handful of articles since this was his project and I would mostly be a springboard for the points he would be making. And we both make sure to take notes on a wide variety of things about the movie, such as the animation, camera work, voice acting, setting, illusions, theme, etc. Since, again, the project itself is a mystery to us both at this point, but it's worth 20% of his final grade, so we assume that it'll be something of a doozy, like writing up the kind of in-depth monster-sized piece that the film crit Hulk nails out. So then my brother calls me over Skype and we give a trial run of the podcast, talking about points we took away from the film, what might be the most interesting to focus on if the midterm provides some leeway for that if we can tie it back to a certain role in the history of films, importance to all ages and adult animation, the rise of Pixar and the rise of superhero movies, etc., and talk about the movie for nearly 2 hours until he gets an email from his film professor which includes the grading rubric for the assignment. I wish I had saved the audio from that Skype session so you could hear what disappointment sounded like. Midterm assignment. Create a top 10 list including your 10 favorite fun facts about the movie you chose. A BuzzFeed/WatchMojo top 10 list as the midterm worth 20% of the final grade in a 200-level course. Realizing that he was asked to subject one of his favorite movies to this bullshit tripe after all the work that he had gone into film analysis and criticism and how ready he was to take the project in a cool audio format, he ended the Skype call and apologized for involving me in the project. This is a project that any student could have shed out in 4 minutes under the teacher's rubric, and it contained no critical thinking or film analysis whatsoever. Just reading the IMDb and Wikipedia article of a given movie and adding in some purple prose to make it not read like something submitted by an accountant. I feel his disappointment. I voted for BuzzFeed hate. Story 10. Went to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and read a paper on the experience. It felt like such an invasion of privacy. We were told not to tell anyone at the meeting why we were there. Shortly after I attended the meeting, our professors pulled the assignment. Some of the students were questioned at a meeting about why they were there, and some complaints were made to our professors. Story 11. On an exam at university, we had to make a PowerPoint presentation, but not with a computer or anything. No, that would be too reasonable. Instead, we had to draw a bunch of boxes on white paper and fill them in with pictures, words, and whatnot. Coloring was expected. This was in a third-year engineering course. Story 12. It's not that bad of an assignment, but it was just funny. We had to create a movie cast for a book that we were reading and explain why we cast the actors in each role. We created Tyler Perry's The Scarlet Letter, and just put Tyler Perry in every part. I'm fairly sure we got a good grade. That would make a terrifying film. Story 13. In gym class, we had a fitness contest. The teacher must have goofed up because 10 sit-ups were 1 point and each bench hop was 10, standing on one side of the bench with both hands on it and hop over it. Sit-ups were first, so I did 10 and stopped. I looked at the others powering out 60 to 70. Then came the bench hop, and they were all cramped from the sit-ups, and I powered out about 100. Story 14. Once in high school, we had to pick a classmate and write a poem about them. We'd then have to read it out loud and have everyone guess who it was about. I had social anxiety and no friends in the class. I wrote the poem about myself. Loophole unlocked! Story 15. As part of the Ancient Egyptian History unit in our middle school, we made papyrus by soaking paper in water, blending the pulp with food coloring, and then spreading the pulp to dry. Not so bad for arts and crafts, but since this was a private school, we also had to pick a Bible verse and write on the papyrus using calligraphy. Story 16. I went to a vocational/tech school in high school for aviation. One of my assignments was to trace the terminal area chart for Long Island, where I live, which also included the Kennedy/LaGuardia plus Newark cluster of Class B airspace. All of the obstructions in the New York City area, and much, much more. My teacher told us it would help us memorize our local area and airspace limits, radio frequencies, etc. I couldn't tell you most of the information on this chart to save my life. Took me the better part of 50 work hours, and even though I handed it in basically 3 years ago exactly, I have had RSI, repetitive strain injury, issues with my right hand since. Story 17. Lived in Okinawa and went to a DODDS, Department of Defense Dependent School. High school for American military children. A 9th grade science teacher broke her hip and was shipped to Hawaii, and they replaced her with a PE certified instructor. She had no idea what she was doing. 95% of the students refused to do their work since they could just use the excuse of the teacher switching and them being like, oh, so confused by the switch in styles. Come the end of the year, and she had to offer extra credit to raise their grades. The assignment? Give a presentation on some parts of the human body and you get a free 100 points added to your grade. I'm sitting pretty with my 97, so f*** the report/presentation. The kids who did do it did terribly. Half-assed projects with incorrect info. The teacher still added 100 to their overall grade. 117%, 133%? That's f***ing awesome, but a shame that you didn't do it. You could have had 197%. Story 18. In high school, I had a permanent substitute for our geometry class. It was evident that she had no clue how to teach geometry or even do math. This was one of the bogus assignments. Write 5 math quotes from Stand and Deliver. She was such a bad teacher that she influenced me to become a math teacher. 7 years later, I am having students take interest in scientific and mathematical discussions and learning in a very high-need area. I couldn't be any happier. Story 19. In my first year of university, we took a test worth 25% of our grade that was so filled with errors that it was borderline incomprehensible. Multiple choice questions with answer options from a different question, true or false questions like, how long ago approximately did we separate from chimpanzees? There were 90 students in an exam hall writing this test, and the supervisors did their best. It ended up being a bell-curved 23% upwards because the average grade was 45. For the chimpanzee question, did you ever find out if the correct answer was true or false? Story 20. Having to read a book called Coal for my high school world geography class for summer reading. It was literally about the history of coal, and we had to write a report on every frickin' chapter. I used to love reading. I swear the god-awful books my school assigned us made me hate it. After we turned in our assignments on the first day of school, we never talked about coal again. Also, I live/grew up in Texas, and if you're gonna make us read about a natural resource, you'd think you'd choose oil. I read the book for fun, and it was awful even then. The book itself is 1/3 history of coal and 2/3 how bad it is. Story 21. In my high school, we were studying the Russian Revolution. Our assignment was to write a transcript of like a BBC radio interview with a Bolshevik leader. The time period of the revolution was before BBC radio. Hell, personal radio for entertainment wasn't even a thing at the time. This is in history class. But I realized I can have fun with this, so I do it in the style of that sort of modern radio interview. The interview warns the communists that this is an interview and not a platform for his propaganda. Of course, the commie keeps bursting out all the propaganda, all those Bolshevik phrases and keywords that I had learned in class and markers usually liked so much. Eventually, the interviewer is fed up and calls for security to throw the commie out, and the interview ends. It was funny, and I had worked rather hard on it. Out of the 4-tier grading system, excellent, merit, achieved, not achieved, the teacher, who was kind of a cunt and didn't like me very much, only gave me merit, like a B, giving the vague, oh, you were so close, buddy, it's not quite there yet answer as to why I didn't get excellence. So yeah, the premise of the assignment was dumb, and so was my grade for it. Story 22. It was an art project. The teacher didn't get the scope and nobody realized it either. It was a beaded portrait. We each got a 45 by 45 wood sheet. We had to glue beads on it to make a picture. The whole board had to be covered. The problem was that we were using these micro beads. These beads are 1 by 2 millimeters wide. We were given a week to complete the project and the beads could not be random. They all had to point in one direction. Running a few numbers in my head, this was borderline impossible unless we spent all our time doing it. Most people came up with these crazy elaborate patterns, portraits, landscapes, animals, etc. I figured completion is the key. I made a simple stripe pattern, each stripe with one color, and most people got a toothpick or a pen, put a bead on it, and dipped it in glue and put it into place. Run the math, it is impossible to finish in time with that way. I did my trick. Dump a load of glue on an area, pour beads on them, and then use a mechanical pencil to push them around and align them. Art was always my lowest grade ever, but using my way, I was the only one able to pass on time. The next person was a week later, and he was also a slacker who didn't care and just dumped beads onto the glue and was flattening them so they would all point whichever way. The good artists in the class passed weeks late. One was a month late. Due to a grave incurred subjectivity of the art and being the only person in on time, I got 100% with my stripes. The next highest grade was 80%. A landscape done in beads. Looked like something people would buy in a store. It didn't make much sense. It was an art class, but easily the ugliest piece got the best mark for being on time. And the nicest piece isn't, because doing something nice took some time. The teacher never did that medium again. Story 23. Once in high school science, I had to make a film ad for traveling to another planet in our solar system. I chose Mars just 'cause and began writing the script. However, the issue was that there were only so many facts about Mars I could put into a 2-minute film without the ad beginning to sound like a Martian propaganda film. So eventually, my sister, a film uni student, began to help me regardless of the consequences, and we began to fill 1.5 minutes of the ad with nonsensical aliens, advertising things to do at a Mars hotel, information about old grandpas skiing down Mars's sand dunes, and information about past experiences of little children experiencing with using the low-gravity toilets, all with photoshopped stock footage as a visual aid. By the end, we had developed my own mythos for the timeline where this ad existed, and I and my sister were in hysterics after spending weeks on this project that seemed to include everything that had been asked for, while also being our bloody magnum opus of humor at the time. So I handed it in, unsure if it would pass with flying colors or just fail miserably and be forced to redo the project. I never heard anything from the teacher about my grades from the project again. Whenever my class asked, he just said he was still marking it and needed more time. But every so often, he'd give the marks of 1 or 2 of the students out for them to see, which, as luck would have it, would never be mine. Eventually, he swapped teaching our class for another one, as it was quite normal halfway through the year at my school, and I never got the results from that assignment ever again. The results for the entire class were never published even at the end of the year report, and never impacted our grades for the class. Story 24. We had to take a very biased survey for the school paper. It was regarding racism in America. Here are some questions I found interesting. First of all, they used the word murder, even though what he did is in no way considered to be murder. He did kill him, yes, but the most that he could have been accused of is manslaughter. Question. Non-whites skip this question. How has white privilege affected your life? It seems odd that they would add a question like this. It assumes that white people are greatly affected by white privilege, even though, at least where I live, all races are treated the same. Question. Was Officer George Zimmerman justified in the murder of teen Trayvon Martin? Okay, the murder thing again. I'll let that slide, but Officer George Zimmerman. He wasn't a cop. Jeez, do your research, kids. Now, I'm not racist, but I feel like the survey was terrible, with blatant bias and constant mistakes. It wasn't a proper survey. Story 25. I send people to them all the time in my work. I work for a corporate real estate firm. There's a ton of information in local libraries about the history of a location that's not online. Things like what the site used to be before the current owners owned it. We found several sites that were old gas stations, dry cleaners, and other businesses that have tipped us off that there may be contaminated soil. That can all cost millions to clean up, and once you buy the property, you own the liabilities as well. There was one particular case where an old thermometer factory had been demolished and a daycare was built there years later. Mercury vapors hover around the floors where babies crawled. Children got mercury poisoning, which can be deadly and have lifelong effects. If the real estate firms simply had gone to the local library, they could have accessed historical records of the site and avoided purchasing the entire property. Almost none of that information is online. TLDR, you need to know how to use the library. Having fun isn't hard when you've got a library card. Story 26. The dumbest I ever had was dumb for a bit of a different reason. I was in the GT, Gifted and Talented, program at my schools, and for whatever reason, the projects that we did in some classes were pretty much just busy work with no real academic benefit. Specifically, in my 5th grade class, we had to make a collage of information about our family's history, which was stupid enough on its own. What made this specific project the dumbest I ever had was the fact that about half my class and I had to do it twice, and almost a third time because my teacher lost it both times we turned it in. Luckily, from what I remember, she ended up giving us all A's on it instead of having us redo it again. It was either that or the time that my economics teacher in my senior year of high school had us do projects on entrepreneurs and not only let me do mine on Gerald Butler because she liked him, but also gave me an A because she was old and rich and honestly just didn't care. Got a few decent stories because of her being lazy. Story 27. It was a tradition for kids at my school during the summer between the 5th and 6th grade to make a bug collection of 40 different bugs. We had to catch and kill them while keeping them completely intact. We then had to label each of the bugs by their scientific and regular names, pin them all into a fancy schmancy case, and turn them all in at the beginning of the year with a report on one of the types of bugs. The bug cases were then all displayed in the lunchroom for the first 2 months of school. We had gotten a new 6th grade teacher when I did it, and she was terrified of all bugs, so she just gave everyone an automatic A. However, when my older brother did it, my parents didn't have enough money or time to get a nice bug bag, so he almost failed the project because my teacher didn't like his little box. Furthermore, because they were such a tiny class, this project caused all sorts of display of hierarchy, such as, she has the most money and therefore the best display, so she's a better person. Another tradition at our school was for the 4th graders to have to fast for 48 hours for our Bible class. Like, our parents had to sign that we did it at home as well, and we would get an F if we didn't do it. I was underweight and sickly already, so my parents just made me take the F. There were a few kids that made it the whole way, but all ended up either puking or passing out just before the end of the 48 hours, so I felt like my school shouldn't have allowed this as an assignment.